A prejudiced officer obstructing a black man from entering the staff parking area. What the officer failed to realize was that the individual he was confronting was not merely an early visitor. He was the judge who governed the very courthouse he was guarding, and within minutes, that error would rebound upon him in a manner he had never anticipated. Before we proceed further, please share where in the world you are viewing this from, and ensure you subscribe, as tomorrow's narrative is one you won't want to miss. The incident commenced with Officer Brandon Cole, a 34-year-old patrolman recently reassigned to early morning courthouse security. He was not new to law enforcement, but he was new to this post, and the transition had not been particularly smooth. Brandon was known among some of his colleagues for having a short temper and a propensity for judging individuals too hastily, especially those he did not recognize. This particular morning, he arrived earlier than usual, pacing near the gate with his hands on his belt and his eyes surveying the quiet lot. The sun had barely risen, but the officer already appeared tense, as if preparing for a problem no one else foresaw. The parking lot was deserted, save for him, the kind of stillness that renders even minor movements suspicious. And when headlights rounded the corner, Brandon straightened and shifted his weight forward, already convinced this was something he needed to address. The vehicle approaching the gate was a dark SUV with tinted windows, immaculate, gleaming, nothing out of the ordinary. But Brandon's eyes narrowed. He did not recognize it. He did not recognize the driver's silhouette either, and without waiting for the vehicle to halt, he stepped directly in front of the gate, his hand raised sharply, signaling the driver to stop. Inside the SUV, the man behind the wheel lowered the window, and the morning light revealed the composed countenance of Judge Malcolm Hayes. But Brandon was unaware of this. To him, this was merely someone he assumed did not belong. "Good morning," the driver said politely. "I'm heading to my parking spot." Brandon did not reciprocate the greeting. He did not even glance at the badge clipped to the dashboard. Instead, he widened his stance and lifted his chin. "This lot is exclusively for courthouse officials," he stated rigidly. "You cannot proceed through here." The judge surveyed the nearly empty lot and then returned his gaze to the officer. "That's precisely why I'm here," he responded calmly. "I work in this building." But Brandon shook his head before the sentence was even complete. "Not this morning, you don't. Identification, now." The tone was not professional. It was not neutral. It was imbued with a suspicion that did not stem from policy, but from assumption. The judge reached into his coat pocket, moving deliberately so as not to be misinterpreted by the officer. He was not yet annoyed, but he was surprised. He had parked in this lot for years, and not once had he been stopped in this manner. As he withdrew his ID holder, Brandon abruptly moved closer to the driver's window. Too close for comfort, peering into the SUV as if expecting to find something amiss. "Sir, there's no need to get so close," the judge said gently. "I am providing you with my identification." But the officer was not listening. He was scrutinizing the judge's attire as if the absence of a robe or formal wear confirmed his own prejudice. "Are you heading to jury duty?" Brandon inquired bluntly. "No." "Well, then you're most certainly in the wrong location." The judge paused, observing the officer's posture, his tone, and the unyielding confidence in his eyes. This was not a misunderstanding stemming from confusion. This was something different, something the judge had encountered far too many times. Nevertheless, he maintained a steady voice. "Officer, my name is Malcolm Hayes. I do not require your name. I require proof that you belong here." The judge exhaled slowly. He understood the regulations. He knew the procedures, but he also recognized when someone was disregarding both. "You would have seen the identification if you had allowed me to finish," he replied, holding it up in plain sight. "This is my courthouse. My office is inside. I have reserved parking." Brandon did not even look at it. Instead, he waved his hand dismissively. "Anyone can print something like that. Move your vehicle. You are obstructing my view." That was the juncture when the tension shifted. The judge's expression transformed. Not anger, not fear, but something colder. Realization. This officer was not verifying credentials. He was not adhering to protocol. He had made a determination, the instant he observed the driver, and behind them, the security cameras continued to record, capturing every moment. "Officer," the judge stated, his voice now firmer, "you are making a grave error." Brandon smirked, folding his arms. "No, I'm performing my duty." But he was not. And in just a few minutes, everyone in that building would understand precisely how mistaken he was. Officer Brandon Cole remained in his position before the parking gate. If anything, he appeared even more resolute, as if preventing this one individual somehow validated his performance. His jaw was clenched, his hands hovered near his belt, and his eyes were fixed on the judge as if awaiting the slightest provocation to worsen the situation. Judge Malcolm Hayes stayed seated in his SUV, one hand on the steering wheel, the other still holding out his identification. He was not tense, but his patience had waned. Years of experience had taught him that moments like these could escalate rapidly, not due to his actions, but due to what someone else had already decided about him. "Officer Cole," he said slowly, "you are refusing to verify the identification I have presented to you." Brandon exhaled sharply. "That signifies nothing to me. You could have printed that in your living room." The judge maintained a steady gaze. "This is a government-issued identification. It features a barcode, a hologram, and the courthouse seal. It is the same identification that all personnel within this building utilize, including the officers." Brandon shrugged. "I do not recognize you." "You do not need to recognize me," the judge responded. "You merely need to adhere to procedure." But procedure was not occupying the officer's thoughts. Something else was. A quiet confluence of ego, suspicion, and something even more perilous: presumption. Brandon tapped the gate control box beside him. "Listen, I will not be opening this until I receive confirmation. Step out of the vehicle." The judge raised an eyebrow. "For what reason?" "To verify your identity." "There is already verification in your hand," the judge stated plainly. The officer's nostrils flared. He stepped closer to the car once more, too close, invading space he had no right to. "Sir, step out of the vehicle. Do not make this difficult." The judge looked ahead for a moment, observing the quiet parking lot. The sun was just beginning to rise enough to cast long shadows across the pavement. A few vehicles were starting to arrive in the distance, but none close enough to intervene. He turned back to the officer. "I will not be exiting unless you provide me with a lawful reason." Brandon scoffed. "You people always—" He caught himself. Too late. The judge's expression sharpened slightly. "You people!" Brandon looked away quickly, feigning attention to the gate controls. "You heard me. You are delaying my morning. You should not even be here this early." Officers commence their duties at 6 a.m. Judges sometimes begin earlier. Brandon shook his head as if disbelieving every word. "Not the ones I'm acquainted with." The judge inhaled slowly, steadying his tone. "Officer, I work within this building. I possess a reserved parking space. If you would simply scan the identification, you would observe my name, my position, and my clearance." Brandon ignored him and reached for his radio instead. He pressed the button firmly, his voice clipped and irritated. "Dispatch, this is Cole. I have an unidentified black male attempting to access the staff lot. He claims to work here, but his identification appears questionable." The judge closed his eyes for a moment. He had heard variations of that statement far too often, but hearing it here, at his own courthouse, stung differently. Dispatch crackled. "Cole, what is the name on the ID?" Brandon did not respond. He continued to stare at the judge as if refusing to check would somehow validate his version of events. "Cole, dispatch, state the name." The officer pressed the radio again. "Stand by. He is refusing instructions." The judge finally spoke. "I am not refusing anything. I am refusing to exit my vehicle without lawful cause." Brandon pointed at him as if he had just caught someone in a lie. "Precisely. That's what I informed them." The judge exhaled. "Officer Cole, present the identification to your camera or read it aloud. That is all you need to do." But Brandon was not interested in a resolution. He was interested in control. I said, "Stand by." He repeated into the radio, then clipped it aggressively back onto his vest. For a moment, the parking lot fell silent again, a heavy quiet that settled between them like another barrier, stronger than the metal gate. Then, footsteps echoed from behind. A courthouse clerk, Elena Brooks, a woman who often arrived early to prepare documents, walked toward the side entrance, her keys dangling from her hand. She glanced toward the gate, noticing the SUV and the officer standing stiffly in front of it. "Officer Cole," she called out. "Is everything all right?" Brandon did not look back. "I have it under control." But Elena had already tilted her head, peering past him toward the vehicle. Her eyes widened. "Is that—" The officer raised a hand, cutting her off. "Mom, please continue moving. This does not concern you." But Elena was not listening. She stepped closer, squinting through the windshield. "Wait, that's the judge." The officer spun toward her. "Ma'am, I said keep moving." The judge watched silently, observing how the officer's tone shifted, depending on whom he was addressing. This was no longer merely an inconvenience, it was becoming an incident. Elena looked between them again, confusion crossing her face, but she hesitated, uncertain, intimidated, unsure whether to speak up or step away. Brandon turned back to the judge with a smug expression. "See, nobody knows you." The judge rested both hands on the steering wheel. His tone did not escalate, but it didn't need to. "Officer Cole," he said, "in exactly 1 minute, you're going to wish you had handled this differently." Brandon smirked, folding his arms again. "Yeah," he said. "We'll see about that." He didn't realize that the next arriving vehicle would alter everything. The quiet calm of the courthouse morning shattered the moment another vehicle turned into the staff driveway. A silver sedan proceeded toward the gate with a confidence that made Brandon shift his stance. He stepped slightly aside, not entirely, but enough to allow it to pass if necessary. The sedan slowed as it approached, and the window lowered. Behind the wheel sat Lieutenant Mark Reynolds, one of the courthouse's senior security supervisors, a man who had worked alongside judges for years, a man Brandon should have recognized instantly. He looked at Brandon, then at the SUV behind him. "Good morning. Why's the gate still down?" Reynolds inquired. Brandon straightened up, puffing out his chest as if proud of the chaos he had created. "Good morning, Lieutenant. I have an unidentified male attempting to enter restricted property. Claims he works here. His identification appears suspicious." "I am handling it." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Suspicious? Let me see it." But Brandon did not hand anything over. He kept the judge's identification tucked between his fingers, unread, unverified, exactly where it had been since the confrontation began. "He refused to exit the vehicle," Brandon added quickly, hoping to strengthen his case. Reynolds looked past him again, this time more carefully, his eyes focused on the driver inside the SUV. A slow realization dawned on his face. "Wait a second." Brandon blinked, confused. "Sir." Reynolds stepped out of his car completely now, walking toward the SUV with sudden urgency. He did not need to see the ID. He did not require a barcode or a hologram. He already knew. "Good morning, Judge Hayes," Reynolds said respectfully, nodding through the window. Brandon froze. Judge Hayes returned the nod calmly. "Good morning, Lieutenant." Reynolds turned sharply to Brandon. "Why didn't you let him in?" The question was not loud, but it carried weight. Heavy, disappointed, and sharp enough to have the silence. Brandon swallowed. "Sir, he refused instructions and he's the chief judge of this courthouse, the highest-ranking official in this entire building. What precisely did he refuse?" "Showing an ID you never checked." Brandon's mouth opened, but nothing emerged. Reynolds did not wait for a response. He took the ID from Brandon's hand, glanced at it once, and returned it to the judge. "My apologies, Your Honor. This should never have occurred." Judge Hayes accepted it without anger, only with a controlled calm that was somehow more intimidating. But the moment was not over, not by a long shot. Behind them, the clerk, Elena, still lingering nearby, covered her mouth as everything clicked into place. Her eyes widened, her expression shifting from confusion to shock. Brandon's heartbeat accelerated, sweat gathered at the edges of his hairline. I didn't know, he stammered. You didn't want to know, the judge replied gently, not cruelly, not angrily, just honestly. There's a difference. The lieutenant looked at Brandon with a disappointment that burned more than any shouting ever could. Protocol requires you to scan IDs, verify names, and treat all staff with respect. Did you do any of that? Brandon shook his head slightly, barely perceptible. I thought... Assumption, Reynolds stated, and that assumption almost turned into a major incident. Elena stepped forward, her voice cautious but clear. Lieutenant, I tried to tell him who it was. Reynolds nodded. I heard him dismiss you too. Brandon's shoulders slumped. This was not going to be resolved quietly. He knew it. Everyone knew it. Reynolds walked toward the gate controls and pressed the override button. The metal arms lifted smoothly, silently, automatically, unperturbed by the drama unfolding before them. He stepped aside and gestured. Your Honor, your parking spot is open. But the judge did not immediately move his car. He looked directly at Brandon, his expression calm but piercing. Officer Cole, I asked you to verify my identification multiple times. You refused. I requested proper procedure. You refused. And you were seconds away from escalating a situation that never needed to arise. Brandon swallowed. His confidence was gone. His earlier smirk was gone. His assumptions were gone. I'm sorry, sir, he forced out. I made a mistake. The judge held his gaze for a long moment, so long that the officer had to look away. Then Hayes finally shifted his car into gear and rolled slowly into the parking lot, passing Brandon at arm's length. The SUV moved with quiet authority. No haste, no spite, just certainty. Reynolds leaned toward Brandon as the judge drove past. You will be reporting to my office as soon as the judge is settled in. Brandon nodded stiffly. Yes, sir. And Cole, Reynolds added, this will not be a simple conversation. Brandon's stomach plummeted. The judge parked his SUV across the lot, stepped out, and headed toward the courthouse entrance. No anger, no shouting, just calm professionalism, which made the contrast even starker. Before entering the building, he turned slightly, looking back at Brandon for one last moment. Officer, he said quietly, do you remember what I told you earlier? Brandon nodded weakly. This, the judge continued, is the moment you realize it. And then he walked inside, leaving Brandon standing frozen beside the gate, wondering how quickly a morning could unravel. He was about to find out. The courthouse lobby was already coming to life as Judge Malcolm Hayes stepped through the doors, his footsteps echoing softly against the polished floors. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, reflecting off the marble and creating a serene contrast to the tension that had just unfolded outside. Inside, the building hummed with quiet activity, clerks preparing files, bailiffs moving between offices, and the distant murmur of telephones. For the judge, it was just another morning, but for Officer Brandon Cole, it was the commencement of a reckoning. Reynolds followed him a step behind, motioning for Brandon to meet him in a small office near the security desk. Brandon walked reluctantly, the weight of the earlier confrontation pressing down on him. The officer's ego, which had seemed so unshakable just minutes before, was now replaced by dread. Every step toward that office reminded him that assumptions and prejudice carried a cost, and he was about to pay it. Once inside, Reynolds closed the door and turned toward him. Cole, have a seat. He did so stiffly, his hands gripping the edges of the chair. He avoided eye contact. You've just had an encounter with Chief Judge Malcolm Hayes. Explain to me precisely what transpired, Reynolds began calmly, but every word carried weight. I stopped him because he didn't... I thought I didn't recognize him, sir. Reynolds let that statement hang in the air. You didn't recognize him, or you didn't wish to recognize him. His voice was steady, but every word carried weight because it wasn't a failure of sight, it was a failure to follow protocol. You made assumptions, and your assumptions nearly escalated into an incident. Do you understand that?" "Yes, sir," Brandon mumbled. "Good. I hope you grasp the gravity of this situation," Reynolds continued. "You will be required to review all security procedures, undergo additional bias training, and submit a comprehensive report detailing why protocol was disregarded." Brandon's shoulders slumped. "Yes, sir. Understood." Reynolds nodded. "This is not about punishment for its own sake. This is about accountability. You need to comprehend that authority is only effective when it is exercised correctly. When you allow prejudice to guide your decisions, people get hurt, trust is eroded, and your own credibility vanishes." Brandon swallowed, nodding again. The reality of the morning was finally sinking in. He recalled the calm authority of Judge Hayes, how he had never raised his voice, yet had completely commanded the situation. That composed gaze, the steady voice, everything reminded Brandon that this confrontation had been entirely avoidable. Meanwhile, Judge Hayes had proceeded to his chambers, already reviewing the morning's docket. His assistant quietly entered with updates, unaware of the minor storm outside the parking gate. Hayes did not dwell on anger. Instead, he focused on the procedural failures he had witnessed. His role was not to publicly shame Brandon, but to ensure lessons were learned and respect was restored. Later, Brandon was summoned to the chief judge's office. The judge did not scold him or berate him, but his mere presence was sufficient to reinforce accountability. Every word was measured, professional, and calm. "Officer Cole," Judge Hayes stated, "I understand that mornings like this can be stressful, but the law and proper procedure do not fluctuate based on perception or prejudice. If you cannot adhere to protocol with professionalism, you pose a risk to yourself, to the courthouse, and to everyone within it. Do you understand that?" "Yes, Your Honor," Brandon whispered, barely audible. "Good," the judge continued. "I hope this moment remains with you, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Respect and fairness are not optional, they are mandatory." Brandon nodded again, feeling the weight of every word. With his head bowed low, he exited the office, a dawning comprehension of how perilously close he'd skirted a significant issue. There was no need for raised voices or any physical altercation. The stark realization had already imprinted itself upon his consciousness. By the middle of the morning, the security station had resumed its normal operational tempo. Brandon meticulously re-navigated the entry protocols, carefully examining each identification card, verifying the names, and making certain he extended the identical professional courtesy to all individuals that he had previously neglected. Each glimpse of a security pass served as a fresh reminder of his misstep and the composed authority of the gentleman he had impeded. Beyond the building, Eleanor Brooks and a handful of administrative assistants exchanged knowing looks, their relief palpable that the entire affair had concluded without any untoward events. They had observed the palpable tension build, bracing for a potential escalation, yet the resolution served to reaffirm their faith in the established order. Errors admittedly could occur, but a commitment to professionalism, measured patience, and impartial treatment invariably served to rectify them. As the hours unfolded, Judge Hayes traversed the courthouse corridors with the very same understated authority that had characterized his distinguished tenure. The car park confrontation evolved into a valuable pedagogical episode for the security personnel, a potent reminder that conjecture can never supplant established procedures. If you firmly believe that courtesy and equity should take precedence, irrespective of an individual's standing or any preconceived notions you might hold, then please share this narrative, indicate your viewing location in the comments section, and be sure to subscribe. For occasionally, the most minor of disagreements can impart the most profound of lessons.